Hello everyone, and welcome to this second lesson looking at electoral systems in A-level politics. I forgot the name of my own subject there, brilliant. Okay, so this video is going to be looking specifically at first past the post, which is the system that the UK uses for general elections. We're going to be talking about how the system works, we're going to be talking about the history of why we have it, and we'll be talking about the impact and the effects of this system. In the next video, we'll be evaluating it and talking about the strengths and weaknesses, but in this video, I really want to focus on the mechanics of it and what it has meant for the UK to be using first past the post for so many years. So the way that first past the post works is that the UK is divided up into a whole load of smaller sections that we call constituencies. And these constituencies are based around the number of people that live there. And you can see in the text below me, there's approximately 75,000 people per constituency, which is why when you look at areas like this, where you've got the kind of centre of London, and up here in the kind of the Midlands, where you've got places like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, etc., you get loads and loads of constituencies in small areas where there live a lot of people. And then you get these areas here where very few people live, and the constituencies get far, far bigger in terms of land mass, but exactly the same size in terms of people. There's something called the Boundary Commission, which is supposed to look at how the constituencies are divided up and make changes to these boundaries where needed. For example, some cities are growing over time and some areas are losing population over time. So the Boundary Commission is in charge of kind of keeping our boundaries, the boundaries of the constituencies, up to date. And if you have a look at the textbook, you'll find a case study about that, because the changes that they suggested a couple of years ago are quite controversial and they haven't happened yet. But that's how the UK is divided up into these different constituencies. And as you can see here, the physical size varies because it's based on the population. Each constituency returns one member of parliament to the House of Commons. In the past, that wasn't always the case. You had some that had two or perhaps more. But right now, it is one MP per constituency. There are different electoral systems that actually have huge constituencies, but then maybe have like 6 MPs or so per constituency. But our system is one constituency, one MP, 75,000 citizens. So what does the ballot paper look like? Now, first question might be, well, what is a ballot paper? Well, when you go and vote, you go in, and sometimes you have to show ID depending on where you live, but most of the time you just give them your name and they give you a piece of paper to put your vote on, and that piece of paper is called a ballot paper. And depending on what electoral system you're using, that piece of paper may look different and be laid out differently. And one of the things you're going to notice as we go through this module is we're going to look at some of these ballot papers, and they're going to look very different from one another because the system is different. And this is what a ballot paper might look like for first past the post in a UK general election. What we can see is the instructions are very simple. Election for a member of parliament for wherever it might be. You vote for one candidate by putting a cross in the box next to your choice. So you basically look through the list of people and you put a cross in the one you want, whichever one it might be, Conservatives, UKIP, Labour, Green, whatever. And then you normally fold it up and you take it back to the person that gave you a bit of paper, and there'll be something there called a ballot box. And your ballot paper goes in the ballot box, and you fold it and you put it in, and the idea is it must be completely secret. Now, one of the things about our democracy is that voting is anonymous. So if you were to write your name on this ballot paper, or say, I live here, or anything that could possibly identify you, your vote will not count. And that is by law. And that's to stop people being kind of bribed to vote in a certain way, or to be threatened if they refuse to vote in a certain way. So all votes here are anonymous. Let's just look again here what we see. Now, what's interesting here is that when you vote in first past the post, you're voting for a person first. Now, the party is on there, but the party isn't there for all people. You can see here there's a few independent people, but you are voting for a person. So you are voting for Paresh or Richard or Roger or James or Henry or Angelina. You are not voting for the Conservatives or UKIP. And so when someone wins this election and becomes the representative, it is the person that is the representative, not the party. So for argument's sake, if a Labour candidate won, but then that Labour candidate called Bill, if Bill suddenly decides he wants to be a Conservative instead, he can, and he will still be the candidate for that particular constituency, because in first past the post, you vote for the person, not the party or not that. Now, my school is in Beaconsfield, so let's have a look at the Beaconsfield results in 2019. It's a Conservative seat, and as you can see here, Joy Morrissey got 32,477 votes, which was 56% of the votes, and so she won. She got the most votes, and therefore she becomes the MP. Dominic Grieve, who ironically was the old MP, he was an independent, came second with 16,000, and Labour came third. There were a few other parties as well, but these were the main three. And all you have to do in first past the post to win a constituency is get more votes than anybody else. So basically, everyone votes, and whoever gets the most votes wins. And this is kind of one of the benefits of first past the post, is that it is very simple. It's very straightforward. That doesn't mean it's the best, but it does mean that it is simple to understand. You cross whoever you want, and whoever gets the most votes wins. So let's add some more keywords on here and go in a little bit more kind of detail about what is unique about first past the post. And I'd like to introduce two words here: plurality and absolute majority. Now, in the textbook, it refers to these as plurality systems and majoritarian systems. Same thing. You can see the word majority and majoritarian are both here. Now, what's unique about first past the post is it only requires a plurality, and so therefore is not strictly a majoritarian system. But what is the difference? A majority, or an absolute majority, means that you get over 50% of the vote. A plurality means that you get more than everyone else. So if there's two people on 30% and there's me on 35%, that is a plurality, not a majority. But if I have 55% and you have 45%, then I actually have both. I have an absolute majority because it's above 50%, and I have a plurality because it was more than you. But first past the post, if you look at this bottom box here, first past the post can produce a majority in each constituency, but it doesn't actually have to. A majoritarian system always does, and in future weeks or lessons, we'll be looking at some majoritarian systems as well. Now, why does it matter, plurality, majoritarian? I mean, who cares? Well, it matters because if you don't have a majority, it actually means more people voted against you than for you, and so that raises questions about legitimacy and whether, in fact, you have a mandate to do what it is that you might want to do. You know, if you get if I get 45% of the vote and a plurality and I win, but 55% of people voted against me, those 55% have all voted for different politicians. So there's no one that has more votes than me, but there are still more people that don't support me than people that do, which is why there is an interesting distinction here. Now I'm going to load up a couple of web pages here to just show you how this absolute majority and plurality difference looks in practice. Let me just pause the recording for a second. Okay, so let me show you what an absolute majority looks like in a constituency. I've come over here to the BBC webpage, and you can find the history for all the constituencies in the UK over here, which can be really interesting if you want to see how voting trends have changed over time. So we're over here in Arundel and South Downs, and it has the results here from 2019. And what we can see here is that Andrew Griffith, again a Conservative, gets 57.9% of the vote. Let's round it, it's 58% of the vote. That is an absolute majority, because if you added all of the other parties' votes together, he still has more than all of them combined. And that is the key point here. If you add the Liberal Democrats to the Labour votes, to the Green votes, to the Independent votes, you still don't get as many votes as Andrew Griffith did here. Now, the reason why I chose this one is actually because in 2017, if I scroll down here, you can see that actually the Conservative candidate that time, who was Nick Herbert, got over 62% of the vote, which is a clear absolute majority in this constituency, and the other parties really had no chance of winning, even with a pretty big swing. Let's talk a little bit more about that. If I just go back to the PowerPoint here. So an absolute majority is over 50% of the total vote. And in 2017, 319 MPs won an absolute majority out of 650. So it's just under half. Just under half of MPs have an absolute majority in the UK system. Now let's see what a plurality looks like. Now my favorite example here is actually getting a little bit old, like me. But I'll show you why I really like this example. We're coming over here to Lanark and Hamilton, which I think is in Scotland. Yes, because it's an SNP seat, so it must be. Now, in 2019, the SNP won with 41% of the vote. The Conservatives were here on 32% of the vote. And Labour was here with 20% of the vote. Now, what's interesting here is if you add the Conservative to the Labour vote, 32 plus 20, you get to 52% of the vote. So the Conservatives and Labour together, even without the Liberal Democrats, have got more votes than the SNP. But because first past the post is a plurality system, the SNP won. Angela Crawley won because she has more than everyone else. Now, the reason why I like this constituency is let's just go back in time a little bit to 2017 and look at this. It's still an SNP seat, but look at this. Angela Crawley gets 16,444. Poppy Corbett gets 16,178 and Andrew Hilland gets 16,084. We have almost a three-way tie, except we don't, because it's a plurality system. So because Angela Crawley has, what, about 200, 300 votes more than Poppy and 400 votes more than Andrew, they take the whole seat. So in effect, all of these votes for Poppy and Andrew don't count because Angela gets more than them, and she happens to get a few hundred more, but even if she just got one more, that's still a complete victory. And so I really like that constituency because you can see here there are three parties that basically get the same votes, but one of them got more than the others, and therefore they take the whole constituency, and the rest of the votes, in effect, disappear because they don't go towards the final kind of result. So let's talk about pluralities for a second. Pluralities mean you just get more than second place. Doesn't matter about third or fourth, just as long as you've got more than everyone else, doesn't have to be combined, just more than everyone else, then you win. 50 MPs had less than 40% of the popular vote in 2017. I don't know the statistics for 2019. You can look it up if you want. But think about that, less than 40% of the votes. That means either in the 30s, and actually there has been one that's won in the 20s before, which I think was in 2015. And to give you a nice little phrase here to kind of think about, this most MPs had more people vote against them than for them. If you look at here, 390 MPs out of 650 get an absolute majority. But that means 331 MPs win a plurality. And a plurality simply means that you have more than second place. So most MPs have more people vote against them than for them. Now, I'm not saying it's bad, but I am going to call it. I am going to say this perhaps raises questions about the legitimacy and the mandate that you get. But what this does do is provide strong government, and we'll come back to that in a future slide. So what is the effect of first past the post then? Well, first past the post rewards concentration. Now, and I don't mean concentration like the image, just for me being hilarious here. It's not about how hard you think. It's concentration in terms of how close your voters live to one another. A bit like concentrated squash, if you've ever had that. Concentrated squash is where they take orange juice and they concentrate it down, and then you add water to it and you get orange squash. Concentrated votes is where all of your voters live in one place. Now let's look at the SNP here as an example. All of the SNP voters live in Scotland. Their vote is concentrated, and therefore they tend to be rewarded by first past the post. Whereas other parties, like perhaps the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party, their vote is spread out over the whole of the UK, and therefore they don't tend to do as well. And I'll show you this again using, I think this is 2015, to illustrate this point. Now look at this. The SNP gets 4.7% of the vote, and the Liberal Democrats get 7.9% of the vote, and UKIP, who are doing very well in 2015, get 12.6. Now this is percentage of the vote, not percentage of the seats. Percentage of the vote, 12%, 7%, and 4%. But now look at the results. The SNP gets over 50 seats. I'm not sure what their actual total was here. There must be a way for me to see it. Here you go. The SNP gets 56 seats. The Liberal Democrats get 8 seats. And UKIP is way down here in 10% on one vote, one seat with 10% of the vote. Let me just go up again and show you this again. UKIP, 12% of the vote, gets 1 seat. The Liberal Democrats, 7.9% of the vote. That's almost 8% of the vote, and they get 8 seats. But the SNP, because their vote is concentrated all in one place, get 4% of the vote, or 5% if you want to round it properly, and they end up with 56%, 56 seats, which is definitely one of the features of first past the post, that you need a significant number of voters all living in one place. Why? Because you've got to get a plurality. If you come second in every single seat in the UK, how many seats do you win? None. You could literally, it's never happened, but for argument's sake, you could come second in every seat in the UK. You could get millions of votes. But if you come second in every constituency, you would have 0 seats, because you have to have a concentrated votes in particular areas to win those constituencies. The impact of this is that first past the post creates 2 types of constituencies, and these are kind of 2 nicknames that we give to seats. And by the way, when I use the word seats, I mean constituencies. And the reason why constituencies are often known as seats is because each constituency gives an MP who takes a seat in the House of Commons. And so if I get confusing here by using the word seat or using the word constituency, I mean the same thing. Those 2 terms are used interchangeably, really, in politics. It creates 2 types. What are those 2 types? Safe seats and marginal seats. And sometimes marginal seats are known as swing seats. And you can probably already work out what these are, but let me tell you. A safe seat is one where there is no hope of the result changing, because the majority that they have is so high that it's never going to change within one election. And a marginal seat or a swing seat is one where there is a realistic chance of the winner in that constituency moving. Now, what's the impact of that? A safe seat. A seat where it is almost certain that the same party will win every election in that constituency. Okay, it's not saying you'll win the whole election, but it's saying that you'll win every time here. And an obvious example here would be Beaconsfield that we were looking at before. The winner there had about over, I think it was 60% of the vote, even higher in previous elections. It's a safe seat. The Conservatives know, without even trying, that they're going to win Gerrards Cross and Beaconsfield. Something very strange would have to happen. It's not impossible, of course, if everyone living in Gerrards Cross and Beaconsfield suddenly decided they were going to vote for a different party. It could happen, but realistically, it won't happen. Do you get the idea? That's why it's known as a safe seat. There are approximately 350 safe seats in the United Kingdom. Little campaigning takes place here. If you live in a safe seat, parties don't tend to spend their precious time and resources campaigning in your area because they don't need to. Everyone knows the results. So for argument's sake, using Beaconsfield, it means the Conservatives don't have to work hard to win your vote. And it means that Labour and the Lib Dems probably won't even try and win your vote because they know they can't win. It would be pretty much a waste of their resources. They would be far better spending their time in the swing seats trying to win the seats that are winnable. MPs here have little accountability. Let's say the MP for Beaconsfield does something that is quite unpopular or does something controversial. They're highly unlikely to lose their seat as long as they can still be the Conservative candidate. The old MP here, Dominic Grieve, was actually fired by the Conservatives. So he did have accountability because he was removed. But that was because the Conservatives said to him, you can't be a Conservative anymore. It wasn't that the electorate was really able to remove him through their votes. And there's a key word for this. Votes in a safe seat are highly likely to be wasted, meaning that they're not likely to count towards the overall result. So if, let's say I live in Beaconsfield and I'm a Labour supporter. If I vote Labour, I know they're not going to win, my vote's not going to count. So in many ways, my vote is wasted. And maybe, you know what, maybe I won't even vote. Maybe the turnout will go down. Maybe I'll think, what's the point of not voting? In the same way, though, let's think about all the Conservative voters here. The Conservatives have more votes than they need in Beaconsfield, which means even some of the winning votes are wasted. Because how many votes do you need to win in a plurality system? You just need one more vote than everyone else. So let's say the Conservatives win a constituency by 8,000 votes. 8,000 votes then are kind of wasted. They only needed one more than Labour, but they got 8,000. Those votes would have been far more useful to them in a swing seat. That was hard for me to say. So one of the features of first past the post is safe seats and it can lead to wasted votes, e.g. Beaconsfield. So a marginal seat or a swing seat, those terms mean the same thing, are the opposite. They are a location where the outcome in that constituency is in doubt. There are approximately 200 marginal seats in the United Kingdom. You might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't really add up to 600 or so seats. Fair point. It's because there's some seats that are kind of between the two. You know, you wouldn't really call them safe and you wouldn't really call them marginal, but you know, these are the seats where actually the general elections are fought. And this is where elections are won or lost, because these ones aren't going to change hands. These ones might. So parties concentrate their efforts here, and therefore policies are often tailored towards the marginal seats. You don't need to win the votes from Beaconsfield. You've already got them. So why bother making policies that are going to affect them? In the same vein, Labour knows they're going to lose Beaconsfield, so why bother appealing to those voters? But they might as well make policies that will appeal to people that actually could bring them victory. Votes are more valuable in a swing seat as they are far more likely to influence the result. So would the Conservatives prefer to have 8,000 extra votes in Beaconsfield or in Watford, where I live? They'd rather have them in Watford because that's actually going to change the result. It can also lead to something that we'll cover a little bit later, known as tactical voting, which is where people vote for not necessarily the person they like, but the person they think that can win. So make sure you understand these two terms before we move on to the next slide. Two more key terms for you: wasted tactics, or wasted vote, and tactical voting. We've already addressed these two terms, but I want to go into them in a little bit more detail because they're important when you understand some of the features of our system. A wasted vote is any vote which doesn't count towards the final result. This includes losing votes and, as I explained previously, votes surplus to the winner's requirements. The threat of a wasted vote often leads to low turnout and voter disillusionment. It is possible, it's not guaranteed, but it is possible that one of the reasons people get very turned off politics is because of our electoral system, because it prevents people always being able to vote for the parties that they really believe in. So let's say, for example, you're a Green Party supporter, or to use the example from 2015, what about a UKIP supporter? Or maybe a Liberal Democrat supporter? It must be extremely disheartening to see that your party gets 10% of the vote and gets one seat, or sees that your party gets, 8% of the vote, but then ends up with only 8 seats, when proportionally you should be on like 100 or like 80 seats or so. It must be very, very disillusioning, and maybe will turn you off politics when you think, well, what's the point if I can't win, if I can't make a difference? Because wasted votes generally work against the smaller parties, the Greens, UKIP, Liberal Democrats. There are probably others that I can't think off the top of my head. The SNP is definitely the exception here because, why? Because their vote is concentrated all in one area. So some people think to themselves, well, I don't want my vote to be wasted. I don't want to vote for a party that's just definitely going to lose. So what can I do instead? So that leads some people to do what's called tactical voting. A tactical vote is where someone doesn't vote for their favorite party because of the system. Instead, they vote for a party that could win, that perhaps they don't mind, but their main goal is to stop the party that they don't like from winning. So I'll use the example here that I've got here. So let's say I really don't like the Conservatives and I'm a Liberal Democrat fan. But there's no chance the Liberal Democrats will win here, but Labour could. So what I might do is I might kind of think, well, I'm not really a Labour fan, but I really don't like the Conservatives, so I'm going to vote Labour. I'm going to play this one tactically. I don't really want Labour to win, but I definitely don't want the Conservatives to win, so I'm going to vote Labour to try and keep the Conservative candidate out. This is known as tactical voting. And there have even in the past been websites set up. I think there was something called sharemyvote.com or shareyourvote.com, where people would go online and they would trade votes. So I'll use the same example again. So let's say I'm a Liberal Democrat fan and I live in, I don't know, Beaconsfield, and someone else is a Labour fan and they live somewhere else that Labour can't win. And so what happens is we can actually kind of trade votes. So we kind of say, well, you vote Labour for me in a place where Labour can win, and I'll vote Liberal Democrat for you in a place where the Liberal Democrats can win, or the other way around. And so this website wasn't official. It wasn't an official government thing, but it was some people trying to kind of get around some of the issues with first past the post and what it kind of causes. Google it and have a look up. I don't know if it was around in 2019, but it was definitely around before. Okay. Last slide, I think. Yes. Okay, so two more key words I want to talk to you about, or two key concepts. Now, remember, we're talking here about the impact of first past the post. And I'm trying as much as possible to kind of just tell you what the impact is without saying it's good or without saying it's bad. I'm probably doing a bad job of this, but I'm trying to just kind of explain the impact that it has. It does cause safe seats. It does cause tactical voting. It does cause what we're going to call the winner's bonus and so on. So have a look at this. And I've used the old ABBA song here, The Winner Takes It All, to kind of make this point here. First past the post tends to give a bit of a winner's bonus. It's not a real bonus as in like someone walks up and goes, here's your extra reward. It's a kind of an effective bonus. It's kind of a thing that happens as a result, which is this. Parties with a high voting percentage tend to achieve an even higher percentage of seats. Because parties tend to get pluralities in multiple seats, that percentage of votes tends to end up with them getting even more seats. So think about in the first video, I showed you the SNP in Scotland. They got 45% of the vote, which is a high vote percentage, but they ended up with about 80% of the seats. First past the post did that because of the way plurality works. This means that the Conservatives and Labour tend to dominate in the House of Commons because those two parties get the highest percentages. First past the post through pluralities tends to mean that they win more seats than the other parties, and so it means that they absolutely dominate. This often leads to dominant government even without 50% of the plus of the vote. It means that, for example, parties can get 40–50% of the vote and end up with 70% of the seats. And this is what happened to people like Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s and happened to Tony Blair in the 1990s and the early 2000s. They got a good result. They got a good percentage, but it was in the mid-40s. And that is a good result for them, but it was in the mid-40s. But first past the post gave them this like winner's bonus, which meant that they ended up completely dominating the House of Commons. And many people might argue that this is good. You could argue it's bad, but many people might argue this is good because it often leads to strong single-party government. It meant that in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was completely dominant in the House of Commons and could get almost any bill through. It meant that Tony Blair was completely dominant in the late 90s and could get almost any bill through, despite the fact that their voting percentages are a lot lower than what you might expect. Let's look what I've written here. First past the post has nearly always produced one dominant winner, which means our government is normally made up from a single party. And when I was learning politics, and I've probably told you this story before, when I was learning politics back in the late 90s, we were learning about first past the post. And one of the arguments for first past the post is that it tends to produce a clear winner, which is able to govern, which is able to kind of get their manifestos through. However, then 2010 came along and the 2015 election and the 2017 election. And actually in 2010, we got a coalition. In 2015, there was a small majority. And in 2017, there was what we call a minority government, which means no party had an overall majority. And it's actually this time period, 2010 to 2017, has made people question whether first past the post really does produce strong single-party government. It nearly always has in history, but we had 3 general elections in a row where it didn't. Now, 2019, Boris Johnson has a majority of, I think it's about 80 seats or something like that. If I'm wrong, sorry. I think it's about 80 seats, which is enough to govern. We'll have to see what happens at the next general election. Will this trend continue that actually first past the post doesn't produce majorities anymore, or actually are we back to the old normal where you get a dominant party? So in the next video, I will be looking explicitly at what are the advantages and the disadvantages of first past the post. This is something that people feel very passionately about. The Conservatives tend to be very passionate that we should keep first past the post. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens and others are very passionate that we should change it. Labour tends to go a bit up and down on this one, depending on what's going to happen in politics. Because let's be honest, most parties tend to want a system that will benefit them. First past the post benefits the Conservatives and other big parties, so they tend to like it. Also, they don't really like change, whereas other parties want a system that really benefits them and lets them kind of play or get involved in the game or have a kind of chance of winning. So smaller parties tend to want change. As a final thought, before I finish this video, we had a referendum. in 2011 about whether we should change our voting system, and the country voted no. They voted that they wanted to keep first past the post. So although we are going to look at whether we should keep it, in a way the decision was made by voters in 2011 because they had the chance to change it and they didn't want to. But we'll find out more about that in the next video. Thanks for watching. Make sure you answer the questions and do the reading as well. Bye-bye.